Sarcochilus orchids are native to Australia, with Hartmannii, Fitzgeraldi and Flaccata all being widely grown. However, it's the many hybrids that are most common, and in this video, Clive Halls from Mount Beenak Orchids is going to take us through the process of repotting and dividing Sarcochilus orchids, and also talk about general care.
Okay, well, let's look at Sarcochilus now. This is an Australian native orchid. These are all hybrid forms, of course. They grow from species that come from northern New South Wales and Queensland in the main, although we have a few that grow down here in Victoria. So here you can see an abundance of flower spikes right around the pot. This plant has been allowed to grow up to a 6-inch pan full, and it has multiple growths, as you can see here, and that is pretty much the perfect specimen plant. The next size up from here would probably be too big, so we'll divide it down, and we'll show you how to do that with another plant. Put the labels aside. You can see by comparison the leaves are a little bit yellow. This one has had regular potting recently and has absorbed the fertiliser. This plant has run out of fertiliser, and you can just notice that it's a paler colour green. So it's a good indication that our fertiliser, which is the Osmocote High K, 8 to 9 month. This has a release rate that goes over about a year for us, and it's a nitrogen level of 9, and it's a 9-5-15, so potash is at 15. So we find this very good for all our orchids, and it goes in the pot as we repot. So let's have a look at this plant. There are two options when we have a plant like this. One is to pot it up into a bigger pot, a la so, or take some of these divisions off and make ourselves a few divisions. If I were taking it up to a larger pot, I'd probably take it up to this size, would be fine, and we would just carefully squeeze the pot. These Sarcochilus make a massive amount of roots all over the place and in and out of each other's pots. Have a look at this little fellow here. He's only in a 60mm pot and busting out of it, and roots everywhere, lots of live root tips. So they do grow pretty rampantly, so loosen the pot thoroughly by squeezing. Have a look, lovely root system everywhere there. The bark is still in remarkably good condition. This Orchiata bark does last extremely well, but we never reuse it, so we just tease it out. So any dead roots, little soft ones, they're soft pulpy brown root like this, that just pick them out with your fingers. Broken roots, can we see the break there? That got damaged as I took it out of the pot. So you can either just pull it off, or you can snip it off with a little pair of snips. I try not to use secateurs on plants if I can help it, but that's nip them out there. The rest are pretty good. Now the extra long ones that have been hanging out of the pot, they can go back in the pot or they can stay out. It doesn't matter one way or the other. If they have a little break in them like that, you can just nip them back at the break. See the little break there, nip them back there. This one, see that got broken? But they make so many roots, don't ever be frightened of cutting some off. So we'll just pop him in a big pot just to show you, and then we'll divide him. So that fits nicely in the pot. We've got room all around here for new growth. It'll get centralized in the pot because it's growing in all directions. I'll put 1 handful of bark in, and then 2 pinches of Osmocote for this size pot, which is about 6 inch, and then keep topping. Tapping is important to get the bark mix really thoroughly in between the root system. If you just press down, you can end up with the bark just nice and firm, but only all around the edge of the pot, and it hasn't mixed into the root system very thoroughly at all. Okay, so we've made sure that our growth is still on top of the bark material. and there's a little bit of a rim here so the bark doesn't wash straight off the edge of the pot, and that's good for 2 years, maybe even 3 in a pot like that. But however, say we don't want to grow it into a big plant, we'd like to have some smaller divisions to play with. We can take these smaller plants off the side here. Now this can be a little bit difficult. You have to be patient because it's very easy to break a growth off without any roots left on it. So it's just a matter of feeling where you can. That just pulled away then. I hope you noticed it. Okay, just pulled away very nicely. We got those divisions still joined together. This makes a nice little plant all on its own. So let's say we keep that as one division. It's still got all the flowers on. It often frightens people when they see me potting plants in flower, but once they've flowered, once they're in flower, it's not going to make any difference. If you don't physically damage them while you're potting, it won't affect the plant at all. So that can go into a 4-inch pot like that, pretty much the one it came out of, I guess. I reuse pots back on a plant that's come straight out of it. If the pot's in good condition, you might as well reuse it. It was in there before, so it's not going to inherit anything nasty from some other plant. Okay, little bit of bark. That basically the bark I put in the bottom is to stop the fertiliser running out of the drainage holes. We like it down the bottom because traditionally orchids search out moisture and fertiliser, and so if it's down in the pot a bit, it makes the plant go hunting for nutrients. And the sooner they can get a nice big root system right down into the bottom of the potting mix, the better. Orchid growing is all about growing good root systems on plants when it's all said and done. If you don't have a good root system, you won't have good flowers and you won't have a good plant. Okay, so there we go. Nicely done. One division, all the flowers still intact. Label back in the pot. And we'll look at what we've got left over. Okay, so this division, we took 2 off joined together. You could keep that as one, or these are just ideal to pull apart into 2. So now we've got one big plant for ourselves and a couple of plants to maybe have one as a spare, give one to a friend, get them interested in growing this lovely group of orchids as well. They only require a shady summer spot and pretty much frost-free environment for the winter. They can go down to freezing, but they'd prefer to be at 3 or 4 degrees probably. The most important thing I think about growing sarcs is to use this really well-drained potting mix. They love to have plenty of air through the mix as well as moisture. If you put them in anything that's too fine or once it starts to deteriorate, they lose their roots quite easily. So it's really important to use this really well drained. As I say, this is 9 to 12 mil bark and it's super coarse perlite. The perlite's in there because it re-waters really easy. We like to grow our plants on a proper wet dry cycle. So we'll water them, then we'll let them dry out until they're fairly dry, then water them again. Now sometimes the bark can get a little over dry and become a little hygroscopic. So perlite absorbs water really quickly and shares it with the bark. So it makes the mix a lot easier to look after, I think, in the watering. Okay, same system, but only one fingerful of Osmocote, because it's a little pot, and it's not that critical how much you use. You use too much and you could poison the plant with too much fertilizer, but basically you waste it. Too little, the plant will go a little bit yellow, and it will tell you. If the plant starts to go a little yellow, it doesn't need repotting. You can simply put a few grains more Osmocote on the top of the pot. Always, when you add slow release fertilizer to the top, you always tap it down and just make sure that it falls into the bark so it doesn't wash away. So there we have it, one really nice division there. You notice I'm not using overly large pots. I always recommend you underpot everything. It's far better to put them in a pot that's a little bit too small and pot them again in 6 months' time than to put them in a big pot, have them drowned in potting mix. They lose their roots and go backwards on you very quickly. So there you go, 2 lovely divisions, plus a plant that's almost as big as the first plant we started with. This one here, as we were talking about the fertiliser, this either missed out on its fertiliser or the fertiliser's run out. As you can see, it's got plenty of room to grow. The bark's still in really good condition, so we just add a little bit more Osmocote to the top, tap it in, and that will green up nicely in about a month's time, and go on for another 6, maybe 8 months, and then gets potted up into one of these larger pots. They will grow very successfully in very small pots, but it does become more difficult to water them when there's so little material to absorb moisture. So I think it's always a good idea to get those up into the next size pot. There were 2 plants in that pot. So there, we take the next size pot down. And these were all the roots that were hanging outside. Okay. And very few were left inside. So these are going to have to go inside now. And we've got a couple of broken ones here that probably be better cut back. And then we'll pop the pots in and just give the pot a little twist as you put them in, so you're not pushing them straight to the bottom of the pot and breaking them. Put them in, little twist of the pot, and they just twirl around in the base. And there, pinch of Osmo. The actual potting procedure is not very difficult. It's deciding what size pot to put them in and making sure you've got the right material to put them in the first place. So, watering, the material itself is just damp, but it needs a little bit of watering. I usually run a bit of water through the pot till you get a few dribbles out of the drainage holes, and then I wouldn't water that plant again for about a fortnight, but in the meantime I would spray the leaves just to keep the moisture up onto the leaves, and wait till those roots start to get active, and then you can start to water through the pot again more fully later on. So basically I'm saying with all orchids, the thing that kills them more often than not is water. Too much water, too big a pot, and too much fertiliser. If there's any problems in growing orchids, it's usually associated with putting a plant in too big a pot, which then leads you to overwater it. And if you've used fertiliser at that rate, you've overfed it as well. But overfeeding, overwatering and overpotting, the 3 main things that bring orchids undone.
If you'd like to take a look at some of the many Sarcochilus orchids that are available, follow the link where Clive takes us for a walk through his greenhouse. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for regular updates on all aspects of gardening. And as always, good luck with your own gardening.